Hey, welcome back. This is Inspector Overview Part 2. I apologize again that I had to split it, but I just saw 35 minutes over there and I'm like, alright, cut, let's keep going. Also gives me a chance to break because I don't do editing. That was like 35 minutes of me talking, which was quite difficult to maintain composure. So I'm back, I'm refreshed, let's do Part 2. So in Part 1 we left off and we had just finished with playing around with a lot of boxes. Actually, I'll hop over to Smooth POV before I forget, which I just did, but never mind. Let's create another box and open it up and take a look. So we kind of stopped just sort of here, and now we'll continue below. But I did want to cover something which I missed in the previous video, which is how to open more inspectors. This one is super valuable if you want to kind of organize your workflow a little bit. What you can do here is you can go ahead and grab anything from the left here, and then you can turn to empty space and push trigger and it will open up another inspector. So here I've got box selected, I can grab it, so I've got box in my menu here, I can turn to the left here and hit trigger. Woo, another inspector. But I can also do this with anything that is a slot reference. So if you remember from the previous video, parent is a slot reference. So if I go ahead and grab slot root, turn to some space, hit trigger, there's the root inspector. This is great because it lets you do amazing things when you're very confused about the hierarchy here. So if I jump deep, really deep inside the meaning space mesh here, which is, the world, and I'm like, I want to inspect the world closely, but it's getting too far to the right here. I could either use the down arrow here to collapse it down to that area, which we showed previously, or I can go all the way to the top again. And I can go ahead and grab meaning space mesh. Oops, that's root node. Meaning space mesh here. Turn to some empty space, hit trigger, and we've got an inspector which is perfectly set up to do that. That will work with basically any type of slot reference. It'll also work with any, in a load of other cases, which we'll probably go into a little bit. I want to go over now some of the sort of more advanced UI that happens with a box. The reason why you're going to use a box here is just because it covers a useful slew of components which show you a lot of fields within the inspector that show you how to do a lot of things that you might not be aware that you can do. So let's go ahead and start with opening an inspector for just a component. So this may refer or duplicate knowledge with my creating a box from scratch video. So I'll link that one in the video description, but this knowledge is good and presented in this context, it might help you out as well. So here we've got box mesh, and I want to go over what's actually going on here. I should probably have not skipped over that. Let's go that. So on the right here, beneath the word parent under world root is a list of components. Every object in Neos is made up of a bunch of components. It can have anywhere between 0 and probably 1,000,000 components, although the more components a slot has, it will probably start slowing down or something, I don't know. I try and keep the components on a slot tidy, such that they make sense. Do know that they will jump around in order, and you can't really change that, so just don't worry about it again. You'll see that each component has a few things in common. The first thing is that there is a horizontal white bar with a bold text name of the component. Don't confuse it with this one that says bake mesh, because it's got bold here, and it's got the D and the X to the right of it. The horizontal bar here is actually like a button. You can click it, that doesn't do anything, but you can also grab it. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and grab the word box mesh, and you'll see that I get the box mesh out here. This isn't really a tutorial on the mesh inspector, but if I go ahead and turn to the left here and hit trigger, you'll see what we get is what's sort of called a component inspector, and this is just a subset of a slot here. So we're just seeing one component here, and you can actually use these as though they were fully fledged inspectors, but they only deal with one component. They're useful in quite a lot of cases where you just want to focus, or you're just playing around with one part of the inspector. They're also useful in some cases for sort of dynamic UIs and stuff. There are a couple of tutorial worlds that I've published where I kind of take one of these, I remove the top bar and the sidebar here, and I place it in the world because it lets you kind of tweak the things. If you've ever started the grid space and you've seen the skybox and the skybox and the ground color changer stuff, there's like two UI windows that are there. They're pretty much these windows, again, configured so that it can be used. Let's go ahead and close that. That action, by the way, grabbing it, is also useful for logics. This isn't a logics overview, so I'm gonna skip over that. But that's how you extract an interface as well. You grab it, and I'll cover that in the logics video. To the right of that is the D. D stands for duplicate. So if you wanted two box meshes on object, you just hit D. Now there are two. It will add it to the bottom of the list though, so you won't be able to find it unless you scroll all the way down. Something which I advise doing actually is if you open up an inspector for a slot that has a lot of components on it, something which I do is I take a second copy of it, and I put it to the left of the first copy or the right of the first copy, up to you. And then if I'm, knee deep in component land scrolling down here, I've still got the top here, as in all the buttons at the top and the transform at the top here that I can play around with, and sometimes I need to copy values, and it makes sense that I've got, basically two scroll panes here to play with rather than having to go and then scroll all the way back up again and go and then scroll all the way down again. Just a sort of useful speed up tip there. Beneath that, you'll see various properties. I did cover over them briefly, but you'll see that each property really has a sort of unique inspector layout for it, depending on what type it is. So booleans, which can have a true or false value, are represented as checkboxes here. So off means false and on means true. You can toggle between them by just toggling between them. Beneath that, you'll see a bounding box. Bounding boxes are of type bounding box, so they've got an X, a Y, and a Z. And also an X, Y, and Z again. That is the start X, Y, and Z and end X, Y, and Z. You can think of it as 2 points in space and a box drawn between them. We'll go over that more, I guess, when we go into UIX territory finally. I am going to do that at some point, I promise. Beneath that is a float 3 for size and a float 3 for UV scale. By the way, position and rotation are also float 3s. It basically just means 3 numbers packed together into a field. So in this case, it's usually X, Y, and Z. So here it's the size of the box in X, Y, and Z. So it's width, height, and depth. Each component has some common properties. I do mention these in some videos where it comes up, but do keep in mind that they exist. So persistent controls whether it's saved. I actually didn't cover that up here, but I do have a video on persistent, so I guess I'll put that in the video description of both videos. Hooray. Persistent covers if something is saved. So if I save this cube, everything that's saved, including components and slots that within the cube, have to have persistence turned on. If you turn persistence off, you'll see that the yeah, that's hard to do. Oh, there's some examples there. You'll see that the color of the slot is orange. That means it's not persistent. You can also do that to components. If you don't want a component to be persistent, just turn off its persistent box. Beneath that is update order. I believe that might control the order of the components in the list. Again, I don't advise playing with it. They will just jump around on you anyway. You can if you want. Again, I don't advise it. Oh, and that reminds me, don't use order offset in or update order for anything involving data storage. Again, they're not data storage vehicles. They are meant to do a specific purpose. I believe update order might also control the order in which they update. So each time a component updates, it goes through the components on that slot and sort of updates them in various different ways depending on the exact setup. I'm not entirely sure on the details here, so that might change it. So again, just leave it alone. It's fine. Okay, I believe that's the persistent update order and enabled. I talk about those all the time. Let's go down. Here on the mesh renderer here, we have another new type. The type here is looking for a mesh. So in this case, the mesh renderer has a box mesh on it. It doesn't have to have a box mesh on it, though. It could have other types of meshes on it. Again, here you'll see, because it's a reference type, you'll see that there is the curved up arrow, which will create an inspector of the location of the mesh. In this case, it's in the same slot as the inspector, but in some cases, as the slot, in some cases it might not be. For example, if the mesh is stored over here on another object and it's used on this slot, it'll open up an inspector to the slot that's over there rather than the exact same thing. If you hit the little up arrow here, you'll get that isolated inspector that I talked about before previously. Beneath that is the, actually to the right of that is the cross. I'll just clear that property. These are all basically colloquially known as sort of reference fields. They do different types of references. It's a longer topic, but just if you see the up arrows and the circle here, then you know it's sort of a ref. If you just see the circle, then it's probably just a regular value. There's also a list of materials here. Materials are cool in that you can, again, hit the up arrow here. It will show you where the material is in the slot inspector. In this case, materials are on the root in some cases, so I don't really recommend hitting the up arrow there, because loading the root inspector is always fun. Again, hitting the up arrow here will load the material inspector. You might recognize this. This is the menu that appears when you create a material. They're actually one and the same. That is just a component. Materials are just components. That's all they are. So you can also do a cool thing here where if you grab the material, you'll get the ball here, and then you can turn to the left or the right here and hit trigger, and you'll get the ball in space, and you'll also get the properties of the ball here. So I can go ahead and edit it and be like, hey, you're red now. That's cool. Again, deleting that is safe because we preserve the assets because we're using the hand menu. Okay, let's scroll down, see if there's anything else we can talk about. Some components will have buttons on them. They vary based on their function, but they look like this. They are horizontal white boxes that do not have bold text in them, as opposed to horizontal white boxes that do have bold text in them. In this case, it does things specific to the mesh renderer. I'll probably go over those in a mesh render specific video, not this video, so we'll kind of skip over that. Going into Box Collider, you'll see two new things that we're going to talk about. The first is the type field. Types are usually represented by this field with a property in the middle that looks like you can click it and do stuff, but you can't. You can usually drag. No, you can't. Sometimes you can. But this is what's called usually like an enum. An enum basically means a list of types that you can scroll through. It stands for enumerated type if you're someone who's technically minded there. So here the Box Collider has a few types. See my Collider tutorial for more information on Collider types. We're not going over individual components here. I'm just showing the sort of UI layout of a inspector so you can get a good idea for what's going on. There will be, of course, other types of fields that you haven't seen. There's a ton everywhere. If you're not sure what anyone does, please do let me know. I'll go over it. Beneath that is size here, and size is where you'll start seeing something different. You'll see that there is a pink background to the size field. That means it's driven. Now, driven means that something else is in charge of its value. So something else is saying, hey, size, you are 1111. And it says that it's pink so that you know that it's driven, and it also lets you know that you can't do certain things with it. So I can't, well, I mean, I can, but it won't save. So if I go ahead and I put 5 in here and I hit enter, it's just going to go back to 1 because it's like, wait a minute, I'm driven. You can't set it to 1. I'm driven. I'm going back to 1. That's it for the pink values. Let's see if there's anything else down here that's interesting. I guess sometimes you'll see here there's this grab priority when grabbed, and then there's a checkbox. Sometimes there's a checkbox next to a value. This basically means if this is enabled, then it will take the value of the value, but if it's disabled, then it won't. Sometimes you'll see lists like this. You'll see only users list, or sometimes called bag, or something else like that. You can add items to it by hitting add, and then you'll see items appear. You can remove items by hitting X here. That's, again, more useful for another video. On particular use cases. For example, Grabbable has an overview linked in the video description, I guess. Here's some more homework for you. Let's keep scrolling, see if there's anything else. That's it for a box. Boxes are quite simple. Again, check the Create a Box from Scratch video to learn more about how all of those work. I was just going over the presentation of the UI for them. Let's go on to, actually I want to cover a couple of other useful things here first of all. For the mesh render and the materials, there is quite a few ways of setting the material on the list here. One is kind of difficult for me to do and one isn't, so I want to go over both. This again is just stuff that helps you sort of navigate things. If you see how fast myself or other knowledgeable users of Neos move, it's because they've slowly upgraded their workflow as they've learned shortcuts or hints. In some cases, they've got stuff parented to their multi-tools or in their inventory or in their avatar that's just like, blur around, their hands moving really, really fast, etc. These are some tips that should help you. I'm sorry that they're in isolation in a really long video, but here we go. If you have a material orb, so in this case, let's just go ahead and create an unlit red material. And you want to put it into the material slot here. There's a couple of ways you can do it. So the way that I used to do it, this is back in sort of 2019, is I used to extend the board out here so it looks like a kind of lollipop. I used to put the laser in here and then let go, and you'll see it turned red. That's quite tricky for me to do these days because I learned the better method, which is if I grab an object in this hand, I can click with the other hand and set it. Actually, let's clear this. So clear, it's checkerboard. I've got the material held in this hand, click with this hand and it's set. That's super useful. Lets you sort of do things around. You can also copy values around. So for example here, if I took the 1 from size here, I can grab it. And you see that there's a 1 in my hand, and I can drop that into the Y value of the bounding box. And I can also do the opposite. So I can grab this Z value of the bounding box here and drop it down into the 0. And you'll see that the box is now really flat. Most operations in the inspector, by the way, can be undone. I'll go over undoing and redoing in another video when I talk about undoing and redoing, because you can actually do custom undo and redo steps. Super cool. Well, undo and redo are the same thing, really. You create a step which can be undone, and then both sides work. There's lots more examples like that. Basically, if you're unsure, just try grabbing something. Like if you cursor over it and the UI reacts, try grabbing, try clicking, just play around with it. The worst that can happen in Neos is that you can crash your game. That's the worst that can happen. So just try learning. So for example, here with size, I can grab size here And now I've got size as a value. I can also click size over here, and you'll see it just opens that little inspector. Size can be useful when setting up different components. For example, if you look at the Create a Box from Scratch video, linked in the video description, or maybe value copy, you'll see cases where I grab a field like that and I put it somewhere else. The last thing on the list here is the Attach Component menu. The Attach Component menu is huge and quite daunting. Do not worry. I go over most times of when we use this in the video tutorial for the component that's associated there. Some couple of notes with it though, is that you can have multiple attached component windows. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you can. You can also delete these. Sometimes I'm sort of like, knee deep inside uncategorized, which is super full. And if you want to get back to the main menu, as in back to the top of the component list, you might want to scroll all the way up. No, just go ahead and delete it and hit attach component again. A lot faster that way. The attach component menu basically just lists components. That's probably another video to go over that, or separate videos depending on which component you want. There's thousands. I believe that's it with the inspector. I don't think there's anything else really to go over. There are custom inspectors that exist in the world. I do appreciate and like the work that the people are doing with their custom inspectors. I don't advise using them, especially when you're new to the game, because everyone that is new to the game will probably be using the stock inspectors. And as the inspectors change when the Neos team work on them, you might want to give the stock inspectors a go again. I just find it faster to use the stock inspector. If you take some time, someone shows you a custom inspector and you want to use it, go ahead and use it. It's up to you, entirely up to you. There are things like dark inspectors, there are things like inspectors that are wider, there are inspectors that have tabs. It's really, really, really getting crazy. I don't personally use them. I'm not too keen on how they work. There's nothing against them, it's just like the way Neos is right now. I don't like how they work. So that's, I guess, it for the inspector. If you have other questions on any parts of the inspector or anything that you've seen here, please do leave it in the video description. I will go over it as best as I can and I'll get back to you. If you've got any sort of other ideas for videos, do let me know as well. This one was a total request from Jason, as I said, and it's turned into 2 sort of 20-minute videos, so apologies for that again, but I will see you next time. Bye bye.